Perhaps the biggest new feature with the latest iPad Pro is the new Liquid Retina Xdr display. This feature is only available on the 12.9-inch model, and to give you a brief description of what exactly Liquid Retina Xdr means, it's just Apple's fancy marketing name for a mini LED display. The benefits of mini LED are very similar to OLED. There are over 10,000 mini LEDs inside of this iPad Pro with 2,500 local dimming zones. So depending on what content you're watching, each zone can adjust the brightness levels, allowing for very deep blacks and high contrast. In fact, the iPad Pro has a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio. So all of this can really be summed up by what you're looking at right now. Both screens are displaying a black background, and the iPad Pro from 2020 here is on the left. And you can see all of that light bleed and the backlight from the LEDs that are still illuminated, basically turning this black image into something more like a gray image. The M1 iPad Pro, well, all of these mini LEDs are essentially off, and the only zones that are needed to display content like a menu or play bar here are the only things that are illuminated because there are so many zones to help do this. The contrast ratio here is insane, giving you that feeling that the display is basically turned off. I know this is a fairly dramatic example, and it's not something that you're going to encounter on a daily basis, but this is just to give you an understanding of what we're talking about. So is it really that noticeable throughout normal everyday use? Well, for me personally, yeah, I think it's pretty noticeable. I do think in some situations it's not as dramatic, but it is still something that I notice. Now, it is possible that it's just a placebo effect for me and I can't really tell the difference in some minor situations. And on camera, it's really hard to get it to show up the way I'm seeing it in person. And I can try different angles like I tried here, and it's really hard to avoid glare because this is glass, so there's a lot of reflection. But in everyday tasks, I notice it a bit more in things like the Mail app and in the Notes app, especially obviously when you have dark mode turned on. Also, when watching content, it just looks a lot better. HDR content specifically looks incredible compared to previous generation iPad Pros. Editing HDR photos and videos is also a very stark difference in comparison. Now, it might appear to be blown out here because that's what it's going to look like on camera, but in reality, there are far more details and sharpness in those highlights, and it's just a much brighter image. Being in a dark room will also lead to this difference in blacks being more dramatic. I'm not sure if it's showing up on camera in certain angles, but to me, there's a huge difference when you're watching HDR content and when there's, an OLED video test, for example, like what you're seeing here. You can tell in those areas that are darker and supposed to be black, it's very black compared to the older generation iPad Pro. Now, it's not all positive. There have been some reports of users seeing some dramatic blooming effects. Basically, whenever there is that stark contrast between something like a black background and a white text or image, if you have the screen brightness all the way up, you'll see some of that light bleed kind of causing the blooming effect around the subject that's not dark in that situation. I haven't noticed it as much, especially in regular day-to-day use and not in a dark environment, but it has been something that I've noticed a little bit during my overall testing. But in general, I do think this display is much nicer than the 2020 iPad Pro or even the 2018, especially if you're going to be watching a lot of content on this device. It really makes the most out of HDR movies. And this feature alone might not be enough to upgrade for other users, but there are some other things that this iPad features that the other iPads don't. And we will get into all of that, a definitive comparison between the two, in an upcoming video later this week. But I'd love to know your thoughts so far on the display. Let me know in those comments down below. This has been Dan with MacRumors. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you around in the next video.